In this video, I want to talk to you about delay, and specifically how we use delay on effects returns or as a send effect. Now, delay is an awesome tool. I absolutely love it in my productions. It's something that I often use to help glue sounds together. It's also something that I feel adds width and some shape and groove and sometimes some depth as well to your track. Now, it's really important that you've done all your due diligence earlier on in the mix process and getting all of those more kind of dry sounds, the non-affected sounds, to get them to balance well, to sit in the mix so they're not occupying every single part of space within the stereo field and within the frequency spectrum. So just, bear in mind that delay does need some room to really operate and to do its business. So knowing that you may be using delay in your track, bear that in mind in the process when you're actually figuring out the role and function of each track beforehand. Now, delay itself usually comes in three different core forms. One is tape delay. And tape delay tends to be quite a kind of lo-fi and vintage sound, where there's a little less top end and it's slightly kind of crunchier. Analog delay is another type of delay, which is basically comes from feeding delay through a number of capacitors, and this particular type of delay tends to be darker in its nature. And then you have digital delay, which is the cleanest of the three different types. And really, you're not going to get any degradation in the quality of your echoes or your delayed returns, other than your, what's going to happen through processing it through a CPU. So with delay, we know that we can create width. Another really important way of using it is to create what's known as ghost notes. And ghost notes are, if you know how a drummer plays, where they'll occasionally tap a snare drum in between the main snare drum beats in order to create more of a sense of groove, then you'll understand what ghost notes are and how valuable they are to creating that kind of vibe. If you think about an iconic drum loop like the Funky Drummer, that would have been nothing without those little kind of ghost notes just in between the main hits. And so it is with delay, that the way that we use it, in the same way with the way I use it anyway, is in the same way as I use reverb. So I use it on an effect return or as a send effect. And that in the same way as I said in the previous video about reverb, what this does is it allows you to have very independent control over exactly what that wet signal is doing, what that wet delay signal is doing. It also allows you to kind of ring fence the dry signals within this main body of your track up here, and just focus on the delay tails and exactly what they're bringing to the stereo field and to the frequency spectrum down in this area of effects returns. So, I have an example here of a chunk of a finished track, and I think this is pretty much all of the parts for this track, bar one or two. And I'm just going to play you this 8-bar section so you can, check it out. But when you're listening to it, pay specific attention to the space that these delays are occupying, and it may not be immediately that obvious, but really think about it. If you've got headphones on, it will be a big help. And just think about where those delays are actually finding freedom and space to do their thing. So could you hear all of those delays going off? They're relatively subtle, but they make a big difference to the way that the track kind of feels. And if we listen to one or two of them, I'll just solo the delays so we can hear exactly where they're coming from. That's our kind of lead sound. Hear how it's pinging around in the stereo space. And here we have some rhythms and a couple of bass notes there. And then we have another delay here. All of these are ping pong delays, by the way. Now this is a bit more of a kind of it's got more signal going to it for a start, this delay, but the three of these together within the track are very effective at just joining the dots and kind of gluing things together a little bit. So let's just have a look at these lead sounds for a second. Now you can see here that there's a whole ton of information. This part is actually unused here, so I'm going to delete that. You don't want to get confused. Now you can see as well, like what's happening on this dry part here, this diva part, is that there's quite a lot of automation going on. And this is another really important factor when it comes to having, using your effects as send effects. So what's happening is we have our dry signal here on this channel, and then we can control exactly how much, what amount of this dry signal is being sent to our delay here. So you can see that rather than simply smothering this riff with the same amount of delay, this is a much more kind of cultured approach, because it just means that we can simply pick out this top note and really get that to resonate. Whereas these notes here, which have less applied to them, are still being delayed, but it's very, very subtle, so it's kind of blending, whereas this is being picked out as a specific note that we want to highlight in the stereo field. And if you compare what happens if, say, we roughly unify the amount of delay that's going to these parts on the second pass, you'll see what a difference it makes to get into this level of detail and automation with delay. And so you can see on the second one, those delays all kind of smudged together into a chord, really. And what I was looking for was that higher note simply to ride above the other notes. So that's one way of using delay. Now, when it comes to the mix as a whole, needless to say, if you've completely filled your mix up before you even get down to adding effects into the mix, you're not really going to have much space for them to operate, to do their thing. And they're going to sound so much better if there is some separation, so that they have their place. You've almost reserved them a little bit of room within the stereo field. And that's what's happening here. And I think that's why this mix has some real clarity to it, and everything feels like it has its place. Bear in mind that we actually have, we have like 50 parts in this track, all running simultaneously pretty much at this point, and yet it still sounds quite minimal, and each of these little touches has room to do its thing. So there are loads of other ways that you can use delay, and you could hear earlier on there were a couple of drum touches where we use delay. You can hear those little percussive hits that are being spun out around the stereo field. And also those little incidental snare hats, they're being spun out around the stereo field. And what that does is it tends to have the effect of just really expanding on your drum sound and having your drums just very sporadically fill up the entire stereo field without compromising that real punch that you have from many of these sounds being quite centered in mono right in the middle of the mix. So delay, when used alongside reverb just to expand that sound, what you're doing is you're preserving the the real focal point, the real clarity and the punch of the sound, but you're also adding this lovely kind of extra dimension and width to it. Anyhow, there's a ton of different ways that you can use delay. Obviously, you could use it on a much shorter, with much shorter delay times. If you take, for example, a delay, just a left and right delay, rather than necessarily using it in a ping pong mode, and you just say use one side of the delay at 10 milliseconds and the other side at 20 milliseconds, you can then use that as a means of stereo spreading a sound. So rather than it sounding obviously like there's a bunch of delaying going on, it's just a means of separating the signal out into a left and right, so that there's a difference in the way that the two channels are behaving. So experiment with it, have fun with it, but just make sure that you've got the space for it to actually operate. The other thing to bear in mind just before I finish here is that really delay requires the same kind of attention to detail as we gave reverb. So again, when you have your delay happening, let's have a look at this Pro Q here. I'm just going to move the glue compressor to the other side of it. This is our sound. Now you can see what I've done here is I've put in a low cut filter, a high pass filter here, and this is just getting rid of any of the lower mid-range delay content, which we don't particularly want because it could well muddy up the mix. And the other thing that we're doing here is we're compressing it quite hard with a sidechain compressor. There's another tutorial or another video that covers sidechain compression specifically in this series, so check it out on my YouTube channel. But you can see here that the compressor is actually working quite hard, and it's active in sidechain mode, and the sidechaining is basically coming from the kick. So each time the kick is hitting, it's just clearing some space from our sound, so that we're not like layering too much information on those core kicks, and that just allows the kick drum to punch through a little bit more, and it also allows our effect, our lovely delay effect, to just to blend into the mix and just glue things together a little bit better. If you've enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where you can find more similar content. And also please check out my website at mixingmasteringmentoring.com, where I offer one-to-one mentoring sessions as well as mixing and mastering services. And you can also find some PDFs to download for free, which will really help you turbocharge your own productions. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.